Welcome back, everybody, to another Through Help and Back podcast. This podcast is focused on lots of stuff, really. I mean, the general rule is we want to talk about mental health. We want to talk about addiction, substance abuse, problems and issues that you or a loved one may be facing. But we always want to do it from a positive, solution-focused, strength-based viewpoint. You can go a lot of places and hear what's wrong in the world, and we hope that you leave this podcast educated on that, but also educated on what's right and what could be better. This episode, like all of our other episodes to this point, is sponsored by 𝐬𝐬 Behavioral Health. 𝐬𝐬 Behavioral Health, if you are a resident of Ohio or New Hampshire, you probably already know 𝐬𝐬 Behavioral Health. They are an outpatient behavioral health provider, providing psychiatric services, therapy services, nursing services, case management, groups, intensive outpatient, nursing. I mean, just pretty much one-stop shop for everything you need on the behavioral health or substance abuse side. If you're not located next to a new location, which there are up to 10 of those now, so we are growing fast and very proud of that. Telehealth services are available, online services, hybrid services. They can take care of you. They can make sure and meet those needs. There's a lot of services out there right now. Companies that are offering text-based, offering computer-based. COVID has retreated. We're feeling good. We're allowed to leave our houses. It's good to make that connection, get with a real human, and 𝐬𝐬 can provide best of both worlds by giving you those online options or in person. Speaking about 𝐬𝐬 Behavioral Health, we have a very important person from 𝐬𝐬 Behavioral Health with us today. We have a Director of Clinical Operations, Dr. Casey Montoya, is in the house. How are you doing, Dr. Montoya?
Good. How are you?
Good. Some of you may have seen in previous episodes, Casey has attended via that telehealth service, and so we've seen him in Ohio, but now we see him live and direct in person in New Hampshire. So how's the visit to New England treating you? You having a good time?
Oh, it's been wonderful. It's gorgeous out here. Yeah. Ohio's flat and crops and all that, and now it's forest and hills and mountains.
Yeah. It's funny. Having grown up in Ohio, I think that it really is Ohio, but with better scenery. It's got the hills, it's got the mountains, but same type of people, same type of situations. It's a real comfortable place to be. In between towns, right? It feels kind of the same as you're driving through. But if those cornfields all just went up 3,000 feet. So as always, with good proper planning, Casey is here a couple weeks ahead of leaf season. So we'll have to see if we get him back at the right time. And so that's good. So Casey is here. I mean, obviously you talked about last time we were talking about solution focus and strength-based methods of treatment. A little different realm today. I asked Casey, he could talk about whatever he wanted. He could pick the topic, and you actually wanted to talk about cognitive behavioral therapy and, cognitive therapy. It's kind of gone by both names. So tell me a little bit about your interest there and why you chose that topic.
Yeah, it was just the conversation that we had almost immediately following was I didn't quite pull those aspects together of how much solution focus really did influence CBT and the questioning, and especially in treatment planning. And so I was just like, felt like the next natural piece and progression to jump into.
So your view, you feel like they are related, because it's funny because sometimes they can feel in execution very different, and very kind of like one's kind of client driven and the other more of the therapist as the expert, but you actually think they play well together and connect.
Yeah. We talked a little bit about treatment planning last time, but even that miracle question, what do you hope to get? If everything was perfect, this is where we're going to be, or where do you feel you're going to be? And then that next step, instead of just kind of going along with directly what the client's bringing back, we play, okay, well, this is a model that I use in therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy. This is, we can give them a worksheet and show them this is what it's going to look like. And we can talk to them about it. So we use a little bit more of I'll say solution focus can't be structured, but CBT definitely has a lot more structure to it.
And, and I did therapy for a long time, still do. You've done it for quite a few years. It's funny when you look at a therapist's bio or, their profile of what they do, right? And they'll say, well, I work with these age groups. So I work with adolescents or children or addiction or whatever. And then they talk about like different types of modalities, right? And so like I would put solution focus first, but I would put strength-based or positive psychology. But I see CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, on, just about every profile when they are there. So is it truly that that prevalent? I mean, why do we see that so much? I mean, is everybody just embracing this modality, or why do you think we see so many CBT practitioners?
It's probably the most studied model that we have. And it's also, I don't want to say it's easily implemented or replicated, but it's definitely more replicatable than solution focused, right? Because there are stages, there are pieces to it that you have to go through with the client in order to meet like a fidelity. And then almost everybody always goes through it because everybody, when you go through school, they always talk about you have to use an evidence-based practice. And what's the first one that you pop up? Best modality to treat depression. I guarantee it. If you Google it, the first 5 are going to say CBT, CBT, CBT.
So it's interesting because you stumbled into that kind of terminology about evidence-based practices, and so you're a researcher yourself. You had to do that to do your doctoral program, and so maybe educate people a little bit on what you mean when you say evidence-based practice. Like if somebody says my therapist is following evidence-based practices, what does that actually mean for them?
So what that means is that there was research done on this. So typically best research would be you're going to have one group of people who will have maybe solution-focused therapy, right? And they all have depression as a diagnosis, and that's what they're coming to treatment for. Then you'll have a second group of individuals who are going to have depression as well, but then they're going to be receiving CBT. They'll get scaling. The typical scaling for depression is going to be like a 𝐓𝐡𝐢𝐬𝐬. And so they'll do pre and post and see, which one's more effective. And majority of the time, it's always coming out CBT is more effective than other modalities.
Gotcha. I assume there's control groups in there sometimes too. If somebody gets nothing, or are you aware of any? And this is off topic, but are you aware of any research that pits those type of therapies versus other types of interventions? Like, like some people like the old school notion, like just do some push-ups or go work out or whatever. But like there are things out there like breathing exercises or meditation, or now you're in New England, so taking a walk outside, taking a hike. We have beautiful rail trails a block from here. 20 miles of just pristine tree-covered. So I just wonder, do they always pit therapy versus therapy? Is it kind of apples to apples that way, or have you seen them put it against other type of behavioral strategies?
I don't know that I've seen like CBT versus mindfulness or doing some type of practice, but part of CBT is behavioral change. Yeah. And so sometimes that is going for a walk or doing those types of pieces. So you can see there's correlations between that, and there are studies that show when you use CBT and you exercise, right, this is what happens to you. But then there are studies separate too. So like people who just exercise and their depression scores go up or down, right? They see decreased in their depression, anxiety, substance use, that type of stuff. Eating well, all those types of things there are multiple studies. A couple of meta-analysis that in 2018 maybe, I think, came out that showed just those portions can help clients get better.
Yeah. So if in the typical kind of triad with, if you're going to do diet, you're going to do exercise, and you're going to do other type of strategies. So like in our world, it'd be say therapy, behavioral strategies, and like medicinal, see a psychiatrist, medications, all good, right? Together best, but you can still see some benefit if you break a piece off here or there, that kind of thing. So I think we've all run into that with clients too, where like they'll get their medication, they start to feel better. So they're like, I'm not going to do the rest of it. Right. And you often find that like, you want the 3-legged stool. You want to, if you're going to find balance for the long term, you're going to want to implement all of these, but you can see some benefit in the short term with just one. And
yeah. I mean, even if you go to like the most, I don't want to call it basic, but supportive therapy, which is really just like active listening, being kind of that sounding board. There's evidence that supports like, hey, people who have this are better off than people who don't have it. So even if you're just sitting there and just doing that, not to like veer too much, but insurance probably aren't going to pay for that for a long time because you can't show like full intervention pieces of like, I can only write in a note, I actively listened 4 or 5 times for somebody's going to be like, hey, you need to be doing a little bit more or stop it.
Carl Rogers just, throwing a fit right now, punching the air, hearing that, because a lot of the person-centered is sitting and listening and affirming. But I guess if they don't show the unconditional positive regard piece, then you're just, you're just listening at that point. So, Okay. So, I know that you teach and you've been in educational settings a lot. You do a lot of staff development and training for 𝐬𝐬, which is amazing. So when you tackle, cognitive behavioral therapy and that topic comes up, what is your typical way of introducing that topic, or how do you start the conversation around what that is and helping people learn about it?
Really just starting with the model and working it out. Like the old school model was the ABC, right? Like there's an activating event, behavior, and then consequences. As with anything, it develops and evolves. I don't remember offhand the book that I used, but there's a nice manual. We got it off of Amazon. And it was, it breaks it down chapter by chapter and then by diagnosis. So like there's a whole section on
CBT
depression.
for dummies.
Pretty essentially, yeah. It's amazing. Like I'm like, this is by far one of the best manuals that I've come across. But we start exactly with that. Just the model itself, and like I explain it the exact same way I would explain it to a client, right? So if you have a client that came in, we just start with the triggering event, which would be like that activating event. Could be anything. Sometimes it could be something minor, which is that straw that broke the camel's back, or it could be a very huge life event. But regardless, they had this event, it occurred, and then they go into that next area, which is the thought process. So that can include, right, usually some long lines of like a cognitive distortion of sorts. And then from there, those cognitive distortions will lead into some type of a behavior. And then behaviors will then have consequences along with them too.
Gotcha. So nowadays a lot of the conversation revolves around diagnosis, right? And so I hear you talking about events and saying like, something happened to you or around you or things like that. But so is there room for, or where is the place for somebody who walks in and goes, I have depression, help, or I suffer from anxiety, help? Like those type of diagnostic labels, is there a place there, or are they trying to work parallel to that, working around that? How does that integrate into this approach?
Yeah, so I would say it's definitely integrated. You can come in, it doesn't have to always be like that event, but so they're coming in, I'm going to ask them diagnostically when they first sit down. So what's going on? What brings you in? And try to see if there was an event that happened, right? Like I yelled at my mom, she said, you need to go get help. Okay, so there's our event, right? And though obviously we have other pieces I can go into, but so we start with that. And then each diagnosis that we have, you might approach or you might see different things typically in each one. So like depression, for example, you're going to see probably a lot of like thoughts or personal core beliefs of I'm worthless. Whereas somebody with anxiety might have something along the lines of like self-confidence. And so because they have a lack of self-confidence, they're always worried about that next layer to their life.
Gotcha. Is that in your practice? Is that what you see mostly, those kind of the big, I say depression, anxiety? I mean, what brings people in most often?
Yeah. I mean, those are the two, number one and number two diagnoses for mental illness, and pretty sure the world. We might have to double check me on that, but I'm pretty sure that's where it's at. Everything else gets the newspaper articles, bipolar, schizophrenia, but that actually impacts only about or less than 1% of the population.
Gotcha. Do you have any numbers on like what percentage is affected by depression, or what percentage is affected by anxiety?
Oh, I
don't want to quiz you.
Yeah, no, it's good. I don't. I do know that 1 out of 5 individuals in the United States will have some form of mental illness. I have some stuff on Ohio. So that same piece, 1 out of 5 will have it, but out of that 1 out of 5, less than 50% will receive treatment. It's like 47%. So, I mean, that's not good. People are running around out there struggling by themselves.
Well, and also with something like depression and anxiety. So depression from research and anxiety from research and personal experience, there's an episodic nature to this, right? So like I talk on this show a lot about there's a continuum, like mental health is a continuum. You're never always happy or sad. People aren't happy or sad. They have moments where they're happy. They have moments where they're sad. All of that is part of that continuum, right? But with depression and anxiety, if you get too far to one end of the bell curve, they get into like what they call like a major depressive episode, or, anxiety attacks, generalized, or, episodic versus continuous. And so I think that that's what drives people in, right? Is when you kind of tip and you're like, I can't ignore this any longer. Or like there's some physiological symptoms that are going along with that. But I'm a mixture of sad and terrified for those 53% who have those experiences never walk through the door and even try? I mean, again, we're all over the place, which is just sort of a normal conversation with me. We'll cover ADD on a different show, but why aren't people getting help? Because I feel like we talk about it more. This podcast existing is evidence that there's more conversations about it. I know that 𝐚𝐬 treats thousands of people, and we have the ability to treat more if people want to come through. So and we're not the only agency out there. I know there's not enough, but what's going on with that over 50% that has the symptomology but never gives it a shot?
I think there's while we talk about it, I don't know that we talk about like symptomology enough. So people don't know. So like if you look at kids, for example, if you have a 14, 15-year-old who is angry all the time, in the room all the time, not talking to you all the time, does that sound like depression, or does it sound like a typical teen? So we're just going to ignore it. We're just like, oh, okay, it's a phase. We'll move through it. There's still stigma. It's huge that there's rural parts of America. I mean, that's what's going to happen. There's going to be a stigma part of that. Culturally is very different, right? Like Latino and Black families typically are, no, that stays in-house. We're not going out. We're not getting help for mental health. You suck it up and you move on. And then you don't find out until these type of surveys come out where they go and say, all right, let's do a PHQ-9 on you as a survey scale. You scored 27. Looks like you might have a mental health, or 19 or whatever. Have you ever received help? Well, no, but it's clear that you have some issues happening.
When you say PHQ-9, that's what are you measuring with that?
Depression.
Just a depression inventory.
Yep.
So, which is interesting. Casey and I were talking before the show about Aaron Beck, who developed this approach, right? So right down the road here, Yale. It's right down. That's where he's and Brown before that. So what an incredible nerd right from the start. I'm just going to go to every Ivy League college there is and develop these life-changing technologies, but God bless him for doing it. But he has a depression inventory as well. Are those associated, or just sort of measuring the same type of symptoms?
Measuring the same types of
symptoms. Do you think testing is mandatory? Like if somebody goes to their therapist and they don't receive a test or they don't receive an assessment, is that a red flag for you? Or do you think it's time and place? Like sometimes it's useful, other times it's not as necessary.
I think it really depends on that therapist. I do believe in standardizing. I think that's important because then you're able to scale your approach and what you're doing.
Right. Better than what?
Yeah, exactly. But no, even a minor scale, even if there are studies out there about the validity and reliability of a single item scale. So if I just say, how is your depression for the week 1 to 10? There's reliability in that. So even if you're just doing that mildly, but I would love to see more scaling up front. So you're doing PHQ-9, GAD-7, because if those are the two most common, why wouldn't we try to rule those out right away? Not to say that those scales are going to be used diagnostically, but they can still be used to influence our path and how we're going to guide with them.
Yeah, and back to your original point about people knowing when to go and seek help, right? It doesn't take a huge breakdown. It doesn't take a disaster. Sometimes I'll talk on here about the difference between sort of surviving and thriving, right? And if you just don't feel like you're thriving, like that's reason enough. Like if you have any sense that things could be better, it's like, it's not that bad. Yeah, but it could be better, People always say that, like, well, it could be worse. And it's like, well, flip it on its head. It could be better. And if you're getting that sense, not that you walk around in a euphoric state all the time and everything's like, because then I'm going to drug test you. But if you just have that sense of like, I'm not at my optimal functioning, I'm not thriving, that's reason enough to go in and get these measurements. We do it all the time in a medical model. I've had tons of blood work that revealed nothing. And I felt great that it revealed nothing. You know what I mean? And we talk about the insurance stuff and they get a bad rap, but they do. They pay for diagnostic blood work, even if you pass, even if nothing happens, and it's just good news. So I think normalizing that, and also we went so heavy with the diagnostic criteria to educate people and try to remove stigma through education. And, I have 2 kids. I know you have children as well. And they throw these diagnostic labels around. They talk about it. My daughter doesn't have a bad day. She's depressed. She's not nervous. She has anxiety. You know what I mean? And that's great. I wanted that to be on their awareness, but I almost wonder if we didn't swing that too far, where if you are not diagnosable, you don't really need to bother with getting help. You know what I mean? Like, no, you could just be wanting to do better.
Oh, absolutely. And we use those terms, right? We use the diagnostic label as a verb.
Right.
Like my anxiety, my depression.
Yeah. It's like it's a person.
Yeah. Like,
it has its own identity.
Yeah. Is it really struggling with you? Not to pull that away from anybody, because maybe you really are. And that's just, you have no other words to be able to project that.
I had a therapist I was working with one time. They pulled one out of their hat that was, if no one had ever taught you that word, how would you describe it? Right. And that was really, I thought, useful because depression became like, I'm sad about my mom, or, I'm frustrated with my teacher, or, you know what I mean? But they don't really have anywhere else to put that. So it gets put under the heading. So I thought that was a nice kind of flip. If you didn't know that word, what other word would you choose?
Yeah. So I kind of do a similar statement when I'm doing diagnostics. So if they come in, my anxiety's through the roof. Okay. Without saying the word anxiety, explain to me what that feels like or looks like. Or I'll really, depending on if they're very inside of themselves or even really far out of themselves, I'll kind of pull it away from them and say, okay, if you're in a snow globe and I shake you up and the depression is being shook up, what does this look like to me? Right? How would I tell you have depression? So you can't say it, right? Like, but you can see and visually see what's happening.
Yeah. And nice little indirect methods to externalize it too,
exactly.
right?
There you go. So I was like, oh, there's a word for this.
Yeah. You're not you're shaking, but so is your depression shaking around you. So it's external. It's got to be something separate, which implies maybe controllable or transitory, and you can not have it forever. That's that fixed state stuff. I talked about that on one of these episodes one time. It's like, I'm experiencing anxiety versus I have anxiety, or I've always had anxiety, or I've never been without my depression. I think when you can get things in the moment, and I'm currently experiencing, I have experienced, versus that's part of me. You know what I mean? I think you're going to have a lot more of an opportunity for success when you kind of externalize that. So as I stumble into a bunch of cognitive distortion saying that I always have my anxiety, you had mentioned that phrase, cognitive distortion. So CBT in therapy context, or just sort of educational component, what are cognitive distortions and how do we know when we're using them?
Yeah. So, real kind of just broken down simply, it's an irrational thought. So there we have a monster list of them. You go onto any website and you just type in cognitive distortion, it'll pop up. You go to YouTube, help me fix my cognitive distortions. You're going to see a bunch of these little videos that pop in, and you'll see them. But one of the most common ones, right? Always, never. Those are the ones, right? Like very black and white thinking, that this is just where we're at, or all or nothing thinking. And that's a big one. Like
is that the example I gave you was like, I'm always depressed, or I'm always, just when you're talking in absolutes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So what, but tell me some more. I'm sorry. I don't want to dive into that one specific, but
no, we can't. I mean, it's usually the easiest one because most people experience that. I mean, how many times I can say like, oh, this always happens. Every time I talk to this person, it always happens. Yeah. It's a minute one, but if you continue to allow that to go, your irrational thought will begin to start to affect your emotions, which then might start to impact your behavior.
So always or never.
Yep.
So, we can go and kind of look at them piece by piece, but I'm interested on the intervention level because identifying the problem is part of it, but working on solutions. So what do you do with somebody who comes in with that black or white or always, never stuff?
First part is identifying it, right? So we have to give them these forms, and it's called therapyaid.com, and they have tons of free examples out there. And so worksheets are wonderful and beautiful. We can hand them, slide them over, and say, hey, let's review these. And so we can go through just the monster list of them and say, do any of these sound familiar to you?
Gotcha. And is that just for the black and white thinking, or is that for all distortions?
All distortions, yes, because there might be more that they're experiencing. But if they can identify one of them, then we have a place marker, and we can start there.
So that's an actual just like worksheet that you can just fill out, or?
Yeah, you can fill it out. It can be an educational worksheet, which is just it just lists them out. Like, actually, that's what I'm pulling
that's
from
what we have here. Yeah, great. Our cheat sheets.
Our little cheat sheet. Yeah, I'm not against cheat sheets. Look, what's funny is I actually had when I first started out in therapy, I was doing real heavy CBT stuff, and I had a clipboard, and I still have it. It's in the basement. I have to find it. I'll show it to you one day. But if you look at the bottom of it, the bottom half of my clipboard had cheat sheet stuff. So cognitive distortion. So I knew I needed to pay attention to these and like, oh, okay, that was there. There it is, right? Or diagnostically, this is what I might be looking for. So I had a cheat sheet every time I was doing therapy.
That's funny. But we're the all-seeing, all-knowing
That's right.
guru on top of the mountain. We're not supposed to, be humans and need that type of assistance. So, yeah. Who do you use? What's the website? We might as well plug it away. I mean,
so like Therapy Aid, they have a great one. I mean, there are tons and tons of websites out there now that they're giving out free information, but Therapy Aid just seems one that I tend to go to because they have a lot. So CBT, we didn't really jump too much into that, but CBT is kind of that base model, sorry. And it's because it started out with cognitive therapy, right? And then we added the B, and so the behavioral therapy, and then they meshed, and there we are. But we have DBT, dialectical behavioral therapy, which does a lot of like communication patterns, mindfulness practices, but it uses that same kind of
identify, worksheet, work on, measure. Yeah.
And then even mindfulness practices, that's a piece of that. So we would still work through mindfulness. There's acceptance therapy. All these are based around CBT. So, and I say all this to get back to the therapy aid, is they have a lot of worksheets based off of those different models.
All right. So that's 3 times therapy aid. Let's come with that sponsorship, dude. I mean, I don't know what else we can do. Ian, maybe we can link the therapy aid in our description or something like that, since we've already mentioned them 3 times, and then we're going to provide a link, and then they'll mail us checks, and we can have, we could just do something with that.
You have 2 sponsors.
We'll have 2 sponsors, a new and therapy aid, and Dunkin' Donuts, because I'm always in here mashing the coffee during this time. So, no, that's good. That's interesting. So, identification, just knowing that I use it is important, because bringing it into the awareness. So, if going back to Freud, pull that water down, the iceberg comes up a little bit. I'm aware of the fact that I utilize that. And so then what the hell do I do with it then? So I just catch myself, or?
So the next piece, it might be a catch. So we can do some, like CBT is riddled with homework, or you can use different terminology, in between session work, whatever the case is. But that's just for practice, right? Because that's a lot of what CBT is going to be, and change is you have to practice it, right? Once a week for an hour isn't going to always get you there. You're a sports guy. I imagine you probably weren't hitting a baseball right away, but you had to practice and practice to get there, unless you're...
First time I ever swung. No, I'm just kidding.
I was just saying, for whatever reason, I feel like that happened.
No, I get what you mean. But you're like martial arts for you, right? Jiu-jitsu and stuff like that. So I know nothing about that, other than it looks cool to watch 2 people fight each other doing it, and MMA and all that good stuff. But yeah, I mean, different even holds, different techniques, different ways to get into guard and things like that. You were talking about that. There's no naturals out there, and even if their natural state looks more advanced, that's still not their final form. So they're not a natural to their final form, right? They just look a little better than I did when I first tried, or something like that. So, okay. So it's a commitment to that. And
yeah. So there's that piece. So they, like a homework assignment, once we identify that session, what I might end up doing with them is just say, okay, so this week, what I want you to do is really put an emphasis on when you're having these thoughts. So we've already talked about the cognitive model. So they understand they have an activating event or a triggering event, and now they're having these distortions, and we want to figure out what those are and when they're happening. So I might say, I want you to log when you can identify. Not all of them, you're not going to, it's impossible, but as many as you can. And then we'll talk about it when you come back in next week. From that point, as we start to flow with those interventions, they would ideally come back next week. I would sit down and say, okay, so agenda-wise, CBT is really heavy on agenda and structuring those sessions. So I say, okay, what's on your agenda that you want to talk about today? On my side, I want to go through those cognitive distortions, but I want to make sure it matches what's going on with you today. And that's some of that solution focus,
right?
Like,
because you're handing that expertise back. Yeah.
And so that's why I was like, when we were talking about it, I was like, this is all going to happen. But that was that model, as we start that process, they might tell me about some event throughout the week that happened, and they might hit a cognitive distortion in that phrasing or in that storytelling. And so I'll say, okay, once they're done, I'll paraphrase what they had, and I'll give them what did you notice the cognitive distortion you just said? And I'm like, I did, didn't I? And so we'll talk about it. And now what we'll do is basically we become lawyers at this point for the therapist. We have to build a case against or for those a case against those cognitive distortions and for the rational side. Okay. So rational belief, we're building against it. Rational belief, we want them to understand. So if all or nothing, we would start off, and you have to be careful on how you phrase these, because do all people really treat you this way? Because that can come off.
Yes. Don't you know what's going on?
But we could back it off, and say something along the lines of, when's the last time somebody treated you well? And then they give you those 2 or 3 examples. Okay, how many other people treat you well? And so we just slowly start building those and wearing away at their case of everybody's against me or whatever.
So it's so funny. When I was young, so I'm old now, but I used to be young. I sold cars for a couple of summers, right? And so I went through a lot of sales training. So I'd play summer baseball and then I'd go like sell some Toyotas, and I was like 18 years old. So if you're driving around a busted, like, 2000 Avalon, that's probably my fault. So, but anyway, it's like, they talk about assuming the sale, right? So this wasn't therapy training. But when I got into solution focused, and they talked about like identifying exceptions, right? Or also the presumption of success, right? Like presupposing success. So it's not a matter of if, but when, right? So, if you could get out of depression, it's no. When this depression lifts, how do you feel? And I always felt like that paired really nicely with that assume the sale. When you're going to buy this Toyota Avalon, when will you be ready? When you see the color you're like, what will you, and you're planting all these seeds for success, but it really is the same kind of thing. And so as a former car salesman, it's like, well, what a dirty trick. As a current therapist, it's like, well, what an elegant solution, because what you've done is you flip that switch on. Now you're looking for the success, right? And I don't even have to question it and going like everybody. So what's the one exception, or when they treat you well, how does it look different? How do you know you're being treated poorly? You must have been treated well to have something compared against. So tell me the last time you were treated well. I really like that. I think it's a really nice flip of assuming, instead of assuming the sale, assuming the success. I assume you're competent. I assume you're successful. I assume you have some degree of expertise in living your life in a productive way because you made it in, right? So all factors, right, brought you here. So that's great that you feel like there's room for that in CBT as well, and amplifying those successes along the way.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, because that's how you build those cases against those irrational thoughts, is that you've had successful experiences. If we go back to that social focused of, the big question is, when did you have a successful time in this similar situation?
So there's some shitty lawyers out there. What if you're bad at building the case? Like, seriously, have you had it derail or blow up, or where they just reject your case?
It happens all the time.
Yeah,
it does. Because you just have some, and that just tells me I need to back off. We're not ready for that yet. And so we just go back to psychoeducation. Okay, well, I just want you to keep being aware of these cognitive distortions. And now I might add in how that irrational belief is affecting their emotion, which is now happening in their behavior. So now I can start to build a case differently of, okay, well, every time you have this belief of nobody likes me, you self-isolate, you get irritable, and then you yell at your wife. Okay, how does that make you feel, right? What does that say about you? And in a very genuine sense, right? Like, what does that say about you? How do you, where do you see yourself with that? And so then that's that same case. I'm trying to, it's just another route to getting to that irrational belief is not helping your situation any.
And how does that work for you, right? Like that, I isolate. Is it working? Is it not? Maybe it is, right? Maybe, a case of an introvert being away recharges my battery, so I'm able to come back as a better husband. But now my wife's ticked off at me because I took that space. And so I think that genuine understanding, and not presupposing or judging that it's something is good or bad on the face. What's the utility of it, right? Like, what's the value? If you stab a kid with a sharp object, that would be bad, right? There's a lot of nurses out there that do that every day. So it's not always good or bad, right? Context matters, and what's actually being transmitted there in terms of information and intent and outcome. So that's interesting. Yeah.
So that's a big, like you kind of mentioned it, like the isolation, it changed. So that might be a different approach that we work, like depression in particular. Behavioral activation is a real big piece in CBT for individual depression, because a lot of times there's the isolation, slower movement, you're just not there. So we would potentially, what's something you used to like to do when you weren't feeling depressed? Okay. How do you feel about trying to do it? Oh, I don't think it's going to help. I'm not worried about it helping. I think it's just something we should potentially try to do or work towards, because they'll go through it. And if they're in their full depressive episode, they're not going to have a positive emotion about it, but they did it. So now what I get to do is build the case for that behavior, because they can come back and be like, yeah, I took the 2-minute walk like we asked or we talked about. You did? Oh my goodness, man. That's amazing. I can't believe, you're in a major depressive episode right now and you still did that 2-minute walk. I cannot believe you did that. I don't know that I would have the strength to do that. And I mean it genuinely, like, cause most of us in this field have struggled with, some type of mental illness or some type of background.
100%. That's why we get into the field.
Yeah.
Doctor, heal thyself.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, and also there's also that piece of where you can always act your way into better thinking much easier than you can think your way into better acting, right? And so if you can get to that behavioral change level, for me, you don't even have to have that direct experience. From a solution focus standpoint, it would be, okay, you can't do all that because of the cloud of depression. Okay. If that cloud lifted, or when that cloud lifted, right, what would be different? What would you do if you got that moment of reprieve, right? Because I have no control. You have no control. They have no control over pulling the cloud of depression aside. But if they say, I haven't taken a shower in a week, if I actually had that cloud lifted, honestly, I feel like the first thing I would do is take a shower, right? That's something we can control, right? That's something that is within the realm of possibility. And then you can get real fun with it and restrict the change. So you're not ready for that. Don't take the shower, but go in the bathroom. Like if you would just step into the bathroom, maybe you want to flex a little bit and turn on the water, but no more than a minute and you get out of there. Okay. Right. And then that activates a little bit of that inner child stuff where they come back and they can't wait. Right. All right. I did it. Screw you. You didn't think I could do it. I did it. Like, whoa, you won. Right. But what you've also done is you've built in a net. So if they didn't, it's still good job because you are in control because we said to limit the change. You didn't follow through. Do you think you're ready to take the next step? You just pick it up right there because you talk about building a case. I think what I would want people at home to realize is, these people have had cases built against themselves for years that they are failures, and they're being reminded of that on a daily basis. So a lot of us have supportive people in our family, and that's that attributional error. We think the world kind of works the same for everybody else. They have people actively reminding them on a regular basis that, you suck. You're not getting it done. You're a failure. And if somebody else won't do it for them, a lot of them have learned it and they'll do it for themselves. So they're in the mirror going bad, 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 bad. So I just hope people can appreciate how that little glimmer of difference, that little glimmer of hope can be that first snowball you roll down the hill to where like, maybe I don't suck turns into I'm pretty awesome pretty quick if you can feed it and keep it rolling downhill. So
yeah, that hope level is enormous. I think for us as therapists or even people who are just in the helping field, there are studies out there about hope. And, hope is correlated with recovery, both mental health and substance use. So individuals who scored higher on those like hope scales scored higher on recovery scales.
Yeah, go figure.
Yeah.
This is self-fulfilling. We had Matt Kahn on, who's our chief operating officer for Anu. And really just, I think, the best person to talk to about those rural populations that you were talking about. And he made an interesting comment about, he said he's 46 and half of his life living in those rural areas felt a certain way. Then the opiate epidemic, then, businesses leaving, natural resources drying up. And the second half of his life, those second 23 years, feels completely different. And when we talked about what the difference was, he talked about different factors, but he landed on hope. That all the messaging was negative. And so as a child, luckily he was an adult at that time, but he thinks about his children in that area. You lose hope. You walk through, you see the broken windows, you walk through, you see your parents dropping left and right to addiction or, criminal justice system or just not, negligence, not being what they need to be. And your friends don't have much. You don't have much. No new businesses are coming to town. Half of Main Street is empty. The fair, which used to be awesome, is now like, one goat and a waffle fry thing with one of those dumb Ferris wheels that are going to break any second. Like that's the whole fair, right? So everything tells you over and over and over, like, there's no hope. There's no hope. There's no hope. And the water, it's not the water around the boat that sinks it. It's the water that gets in the boat. And when that hopelessness gets in the boat, that's a heavy anchor that can sink a lot of lives. So just keeps going. So I'm glad you went that way with it, because sometimes with CBT, it does feel like from the outside looking in, and I don't practice it a lot. I mean, I certainly know the distortions and can go through them, but it just feels like a lot of like label and move. And my concern about it was like, if you just get really good at identifying your distortions, do you perpetuate that sense of hopelessness? But you think it's the exact opposite. You feel like,
yeah, I think so. Even just if we're using that same analogy, if somebody comes in early on, in my practice anyway, I'll use supportive therapy. And I think I kind of use that same analogy, right? I'll plug the holes, right? Let's use that to just kind of get them through that crisis or through that presenting problem of why they're there. And then that way, when we start to try to do something a little bit more structured, we can work through that in a little more hopefully effective manner. And their intrinsic motivation is a little bit higher. because CBT is hard, right? There's a lot of work that goes in from the client's side, but it's also my job as a therapist to evoke that motivation out. And hopefully most people have that, right? Like that motivational viewing, right? They have the spirits, and the evocation is one of them, right? That I believe that everybody has a fundamental way of progressing or recovering, but it's my job to pull it out of them.
Yeah. What you'd mentioned the all or nothing or black or white thinking. So I know there's several others. Are there any other kind of, you said, if somebody, Casey warned us before, like we could do an hour on each distortion. We probably could, but can you run through a couple others that you see most often? I mean, we can do the list, or 3 or 4 that like these are really, really prevalent, or people really struggle with these.
I think catastrophizing, seeing only the worst possible outcomes of a situation, that happens a lot. Right.
So is that prediction of disaster, or is that like just focusing on the negative?
So prediction of disaster, right? So like if this happens to me, it will always turn into this, right? Like, so if I go on, like somebody who maybe like some type of anxiety or social phobia, if I go into a crowd, this is what's going to happen, and I'm going to have to deal with a potential shooter. Right, because you see that, and it just perpetuates in their head of like, oh, that's going to happen, that's going to happen. So it's just a worst case scenario. What might happen? You see people with in flight, right? Yeah. How many people have a fear of flying? Well, that's from, right? They catastrophize it. They're afraid, even though you're more likely to get into a car accident than crash in a plane. You just see, because the outcome is obviously much more devastating.
So I'm going to mess with you on that. So I don't like flying very much, but I'll do it. But here's where my head always goes. So maybe I'm doing a cognitive distortion. Okay. So we'll put you to test that way. So when you say you're more likely to get into a car accident than you are in flying, I come back with, I know a lot of people who survive car accidents. How many people do you know that have survived plane crashes? Right. And so I'm like, we start counting when the crash happens, not when you get in the car. And so now I still fly, right? And still the numbers are great. It's an emotional experience that's hard when you throw data at an emotional experience, right? Because if that was the case, the stewardess would just hand out a pamphlet that says, 1 out of 6 million people are going to die. It's not you, you're fine. And we'd go, oh, I'm fine. I feel totally better. But I always take exception to the car accident analogy, because I'm like, we started counting at the wrong point. You know what I mean? Because I don't know anybody that survived a plane crash. Maybe, maybe one of like a single engine or something. Like you've survived a plane crash?
No, I do know somebody. I know somebody personally it was a single engine crash.
That's funny. Does he still fly?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. But that's
did he need your help to get back in there? Like,
no, I mean, not that. I mean, we don't talk like that heavily. I mean, that's the stigma. There it is, right? Sure. Like, hey, you okay? Yeah, I'm fine. Right?
Yeah, right. Suck it up.
Suck it up.
Have a drink.
Yeah, pretty much.
Do some push-ups. Yeah.
But yeah, so
back on a horse.
Yeah. I personally so with that example in particular, I wouldn't throw the data. Right. So it would be, I'm trying to help you build the case for it versus me just being like, okay, well, your thinking is wrong in that, because every time, so many people are going to die in a car accident versus die in a plane accident. And that's not going to, obviously it didn't, right? So for you're automatically going to push back and be like, no, that's not what happened. You're looking at data wrong.
Yeah. Well, and I'm an easy target because I've flown 100 times. So you could say, well, any of those times did you die?
Yeah. But did I die?
Yeah. I don't know. Did I? Maybe. What is reality? Right. Now we're on a different topic.
Yeah.
So. All right. So catastrophizing, all or nothing. What other things do you see a lot as far as distortions? Because I wonder, I bet you people listening to this are going to pick up on some of these. Maybe we just rip through a couple of them, because this is just stuff we all do. Even the trained and wise, we all do this. So
should statements. See this a lot with anger. I can guarantee every single person has at one point in time had somebody cut in front of them. And you're like, you should have seen me. And it's a loss of control at that point. And we have expectations of other people. That's an irrational expectation.
So the should piece, is that just losing perspective that everybody else is living an individual life and has their own, like maybe he's late for work, maybe he didn't hate you.
And that's the case that we try to help build. But it can be internally too. I should have known better. I should have done this.
The judgment involved in should.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
and self-doubt that comes along with it, right? If I should have done this, or this would not have happened.
There's a phenomenal video on YouTube. Ian, maybe we can link this to David Foster Wallace. This is Water. I don't know if you've seen that before, but he has a moment in there. It's about a 9-minute video from his speech and at a graduation, but there's a moment in there where he talks about, the people at the grocery store who are holding you up, or the people who like in traffic who cut you off and, are driving 40 miles an hour in a 60-mile-an-hour lane. And if you don't give that any type of thought, you can get to a place where you just feel like all these people are just in my way or out to get me, right? And he said, but maybe not. Maybe, the lady behind the checkout counter is a little sluggish because she stayed up all night helping her husband who's struggling with cancer. Or maybe the lady driving 40 miles an hour in the fast lane is because she was in a near-death experience in a car, and now a therapist has all but ordered her to drive a big SUV that she's not really comfortable with. You know what I mean? And so I think having that humanity, and it's hard. It is the hardest thing, right? And how many of us, not only on the should thing, have done that where like we see somebody speeding and we're like maniac until we're late, right? And then we're like, it's like, who's a jerk? Anybody driving like 1 mile an hour faster than me? Like, who's a loser? Anybody driving 1 mile an hour slower than me, right? Like, I'm the only one who's on the right path here. So that's interesting. I like the shoulds and the musts. And you find that that's often handed down? Like, is that a parental voice that stays with, or is that a societal voice, or where do they pick up should?
I think so. That I actually worked with a client before that mom basically made this statement, right? Don't say anything nice that you wouldn't, or how's it go, right? Don't say anything bad, or don't say anything good. Shoot, help me. I don't know. Don't say, if you don't have something nice to say, don't say anything at all. Yeah.
Don't say anything good. That's what my mom taught me. So okay. I think, no. Yeah. If you don't have anything nice, if you don't have something nice to say, don't say anything at all. Right. And they say it less nice than that.
Yeah. So that was, from them, what they did was they made a perspective based off of that I should never say anything bad. So they never stood up for themselves. So it could be, so it may not have been like this should from the parent, but the way they perceived it was very differently.
That's crazy how that stuff gets out. And it's just there forever, right? I know you're not supposed to use that word, but it is really crazy, because it's like, I'm 8 years old, forever.
Yeah.
Right. That's,
And so you just build this, like for that guy in particular, it took us a little bit of time to really dwell into that and to challenge that core belief. Like, I should never say anything bad to somebody, or else then I'm the terrible person because of it.
Even if it's stop hurting me, or stop neglecting me, or stop, even if there's no advocacy on your own behalf, there's only being a jerk.
Yeah. And so I'll never be a jerk because, but everything that's confrontational is being a jerk. And so it just kind of morphs and develops over time.
Wow. Okay. What else do you see? I'm curious. These are good, because I'm just thinking about how much I do some of these. Or people I know.
We all do them.
Right.
I mean, at some point in
start
time,
saying names.
And that's where, I think that's really important for these is, even though we have them, and I hope nobody from, that's listening goes like, oh, I have all these, I have a mental health problem. You
shouldn't do that.
No, you should never do this.
If they have all those, yeah.
Because everybody always has these.
Right. And it's going to go really bad if you have these. It's going to be a catastrophe.
I'd say another one probably that's really good is emotional reasoning, right? I feel like a bad friend, therefore I must be a bad friend.
Okay, so tell me more about that. It's a little bit confusing.
Yeah, so it's just this A plus B equals C. Okay. So I did this, so I must be this. So my boss came and told me that I am not doing a good job with this one thing, but I must be a terrible worker. And so you just kind of overdevelop it, and now you're there. So now we have to try to build that case against that. So for that worker example would be, well, is it everything you're doing, right? Are you terrible at all of your job? And so we started to talk about it. Well, no, I actually got great scores on this, and this. Well, what about that one though? Well, it was just the one. It was right below passing. Like, oh, okay. Well, tell me, what does that mean about you, right? And so we can start that process all over.
So when you were talking about the emotional reasoning, and you're talking about people hearing something and then sort of adopting that identity, what I hear is sort of like an event-based dynamic, like something happened, or you may have done something even if it was wrong or bad or whatever, versus an identity, right? So you did versus you are, kind of being the distinction. Is that the line that you're on there? Or is it
Yeah,
different?
right around that. So think about like the event and then the emotion that you experience with the event. And so then you become that emotion. So like I feel bad because I disappointed my boss. So that means I am bad.
Gotcha. Well, and I think that's an incredible slippery slope because, I mean, working with addiction for a long time, that power of identity is so strong. Like winners find a way to win, losers find a way to lose, right? And so if you adopt those identity pieces and you allow them to kind of get in and that's who I am versus what I did, I might have stolen, doesn't mean I'm a thief, which is kind of a weird thing to think about because the normal person would say, no, you stole, so you're a thief. Forever, you know what I mean? Like, I mean, that's, so that's the problem because if you identify yourself as a thief or a loser or whatever, you're going to find a way to lose or you're going to look for opportunities to reinforce that because I think with all this stuff swirling around and all these different things, there's just nothing more powerful than your brain saying like, I knew it. Because that's that line of chaos and certainty. And if you don't know it and you're caught off guard all the time, especially even about yourself, that's terrifying in a different way. I don't know how any of this works, right? I'm constantly surprised. But even if it's a bad or a negative connotation, if like I knew it, I knew I was going to bleep this up. You know what I mean? There's something comforting about that to our brain and our psyche that's like, well, at least I wasn't caught off guard. You know what I mean?
Well, it's a safety net, right, of sorts. And that's where like I have kind of like maybe a controversial, it's not so much controversial, but just the thought of like addiction, right? I'm an addict for life. Great. I can understand that concept, but we don't have a positive connotation with addict anymore. So to them, an addict is this, that. And so by calling yourself that, you're going to start to pull into these pieces and give yourself basically that escape. I'm an addict. I relapse, just part of the process. And this is where I'm at versus, I am a good person. I have these great attributes. I am more than my addiction. Even some people identify with like the number, right? I'm 6 months clean. I am this. And then they relapse and they lose that. And now they're grief.
Who are you now?
Yeah. You lose a piece of who you are when that happens. And so like a little deviation, but still it's a cognitive distortion in itself that when I have clients who have substance use as well, I'm talking to them about that, right? What are you more, or what are you other than just an addict and a number? Because if that happens to go away, which likelihood it is, you got to have something else to fall back onto and identify as.
Yeah. Gregory Bateson had a paper he put out a long time ago. He was like a cybernetics systems guy, and so he thought nothing was really like level one, that all the relationships and connections were below that level and maybe even in a subconscious level that we're not even aware of. And so it's a very complex system and you pull on one, you don't know what you're, moving down here. And he had kind of an interesting view on addiction where he talked about alcoholism. And he said the people who embraced, paraphrasing here, he said the people who embraced that label as an addict are doomed to relapse forever because one, that's what comes with addiction. So if you are addicted, you're going to go through this cycle over and over. And then two, the self sort of pleasing nature of the relapse is it proves how difficult it was to stay clean in the first place. So if you get it right and you go clean, you open yourself up to your family going, you could have done that at 18. You're now 36, you're now 46, But if I keep relapsing, I keep proving to you how difficult this must be. None of this at a conscious level, right? Nobody's sitting around going, life is too great, time to go screw it up. Although there is some of that self-sabotage stuff out there. But I always think that's interesting. And when you're talking about that, absorbing that identity, and you're talking about identifying as a number or part of that club, I think about that. And I also think about athletes. And if you look about when they get done playing, and I did this at the college level. I never played pro, but I know people who have, and they go through this at the end of their pro careers, where it's like, who the hell am I? I went to bed Sunday night as a starting outside linebacker. I woke up Monday morning as just like a dude, right? And so, but domestic violence, addiction, alcoholism, erratic behavior, depression, anxiety skyrocket in those transitional years. I have a good friend, Dr. Heather Shahan in Texas, works with athletes a lot, and that's where she's had a lot of interest is on that transitional part of that. Like, how do you reestablish a new identity? How do you use everything good from your previous life, take that on? And I think there's a lot to be learned there on the addiction side as well. So, yeah. So do you kind of cringe when you hear the, like, I'm going to be an addict the rest of my life? I mean, because that's kind of the...
I do a little bit, and it's kind of hard because I don't want to like interject because there's a piece of that.
Why? Because it's working so well? Because addiction treatment is like so refined?
Well, if a person's doing like NA or AA, right?
Yeah,
For
right.
example,
So,
there is evidence shows those things work. But on the other side, I see the back end of that. So when they do relapse, I'm an addict. This is where I'm at. This is where I'm always going to be. Basically, just rephrasing what you just said. And it's like, oh, but this isn't where we're at. So usually at that point, if I hit somebody with relapse, is where I kind of give them my opinion on, well, you're more than just your addiction, right? And so then to me, and I talked to them about like cognitive distortion, that's an irrational belief about yourself. So we need to build the case against that. And so what are you more than that? What do you entail? Like, describe me without saying you're an addict or that you are 2 days clean. And a lot of people struggle with that. I mean, it's hard.
I say, I'm a guy about to be 3 days clean. That'd be great because you're fostering success.
Yeah, good job. Yeah, okay. Right. There you are.
Yeah, I don't think we have addiction treatment figured out at all, and this isn't the right topic for it. Because it's funny to be on topic. See, cognitive behavioral therapy, you would have a problem with the word always anyway, right? I mean, and I wonder if you would have if you would have an issue with the word always if it's used in a positive context. So if I came into you and said like, I'm always a great father, I'm always a great dad, since those are socially desirable outcomes, would you build a case against that, or would you allow me to roll with that always?
No, we're going to roll with that one. So when we look at these, when we see the cognitive distortions, we want to see how that's impacting your emotions and then how those emotions are impacting your behavior. So as long as the behavior and the outcome and the consequences are positive, then yeah. Like,
but I'm stressed out because I always have to be a great dad. And so if I do anything for myself, I feel horrible. I haven't had that experience because I don't do anything for myself, but I know if I do, I'm going to feel terrible because I always have to be on for my kids. So there's a lot there, right? Like where would you take that?
So I would just ask you, right? Well, you have all these pieces. There ever been a time where you did do something for yourself?
Before the kids.
Before the kids. And what was that? What was it?
Not sense. I would hang out with my friends and play softball.
Okay. And how did you feel about that afterwards?
Great. I got a chance to relax and connect, and we would laugh. And I'm a pretty good softball player.
Absolutely.
I could hit real far. I felt strong. I'd drink a couple beers, no big deal. But but I would do that twice a week.
Okay, and you felt good about yourself.
Felt awesome.
And any depression during that time?
No, looking forward to the next. Looking forward to the next softball game. Yeah.
Right. So there we are. Right.
But I can't do that now, Casey.
You can't do it now.
I can't because I have kids.
That's fine.
So you're just taking me to fantasy land. I'm going to fight you a little bit more.
No, that's fair. Yeah. So we have a little bit of fantasy.
Yeah.
So do you feel like anything that you're doing, you always have to be a good father?
I have to.
I
had a crap father. And if I ever looked like that or act like that, or my kids thought of me, like I thought of my dad, like no way. Not a true story, by the way. But I couldn't do it. I couldn't have them see me that way. So I can't let my guard down.
Okay. So what are you?
Ever, always, never.
Always, all of them. Yeah. Okay, so we just talked about those distortions. Do you feel like that's impacting your ability to be a good father? Do you ever get stressed against your children?
That's excellent. No, so
or irritable
I know where you're going.
Yeah,
that's really good. So what I think is setting me up for success is actually going to end up being a detriment to my stated goal of being a good dad.
And most of the time we'll hear recently because that's a very common piece. I need to be a good father. I need to be a good mother. I'm like, okay, well, how much, when you're doing all these things and you're not doing all these things, how much time are you spending with your kids versus stressing about everything else in your life? Or a lot of the times, I don't have it on me, but a lot of us just kind of mindlessly scroll and we don't pay attention to it. Like, so how does that impact your kids when you're doing that? Well, that's my me time. Okay, wonderful. I'm not against that, but how long are you doing it? And then when we start to build that case of, I'm so stressed that I'm not even paying attention to how long I'm on the phone, because that is your me time, right? There are endorphins that get released by being on your phone, which I'm not going to stop you from using that as a coping skill, but now you're taking it to the excess because you're trying to overcompensate all the stress.
And you're just self-soothing at the back end of it. And isn't screen time the worst thing in the world? 'Cause it flashes up that you've been on for like 7 hours and you feel like you haven't really been on. Like you're like, I did a pretty good job today. It flashes up like the hourglass comes and it's like, what was I even looking at?
Mine came over on Tuesday. I get my report or whatever, and I drove here on Monday and had listened to
Which counts.
and it counted. And I was like, you got to be kidding me right now. And it was up at like 82% or something like that.
So Therapy Aid, we'll take your sponsorship. And new behavioral health. Apple, you gotta get rid of the stupid. If you're using your map, you're listening to a podcast that counts as screen time. Like they can, I mean, they can get every keystroke I've ever done, but they can't tell me whether my screen's on or not. Yep. Like, come on, no, we gotta fix that because you're increasing my depression and lessening my self-worth here with this. So, no, that's good. It's good. So, do you have any others? I mean, so we've covered a couple. I mean, how many cognitive distortions are there? Like.
I'll be honest, I don't know off the top of my head. Okay. I mean, if we look down this list, we got.
Is this a comprehensive list?
12. We got 12 here.
You got 12.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I mean, I've seen lists a little bit longer, and they can get a little bit more detailed. But to me, less is always better, especially if we're explaining to clients and working with them. Not saying they can't comprehend them all. It's just if I give you a list of 20 distortions and I say I want you to pay attention to these, you might get overwhelmed and be like, I don't even know which one is which at this point.
Yeah, they kind of flow together. How does that work when you have them overlapping? I mean, do you piece them out? Do you stratify and piece them out one at a time? And you did all or nothing less, but you did mind reading more?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, so I'd pull them across and see, especially the ones that are the way that we would prioritize them are the ones that are causing the most intense emotion. And then obviously the behaviors and consequences beyond that.
Can you talk about the mind reading one? I know we're going to wrap here soon, but I mean, the mind reading one is very interesting to me, just because of the fact that I think I'll get to it here in a second, but I think one, and especially in a work setting, relationships, I think there's a lot of that happens. And I also think there's a role in technology and mind reading almost kind of like exploding because I'm running into this a lot more. So tell us about mind reading.
So the mind reading piece, like if I just read directly off of here, it's interpreting the thoughts and beliefs of others without adequate evidence. And the example they give is kind of pulls right into this is she would not go on a date with me. She probably thinks I'm ugly. Yeah. Right. Like I'm not even going to attempt because I already know the outcome. You've mentioned the text. Yes. There's so like sarcasm, that type of stuff. K versus okay. Right. Like that. You're like, oh, they must be mad at me. Right. Yes. But you don't know. There's no, they haven't said that.
Or being left on. So the new one I hear is like
left on red.
Left on red. Yeah. So you know that real well. So
I get my wife all the time. She had me switch to Apple a couple of months ago. I could see all of it now. I was like, I know you saw it.
Yeah. And you get mad, and they can't be busy. Nobody's allowed to be busy. Your kids can't have something going on. They just didn't want to respond to me. So I'm just 150. Is being left undelivered as bad as being left on red, or is it kind of the same? Or because delivered just means it got to their phone, right?
You know what's terrible is that like I will leave people undelivered so they don't see that I read it.
Of course. And you scroll without like opening it so you can just like see the preview. Yeah. See, Ian's a young, handsome young man. He lives in this world, and so he's sitting there shaking his head as hard as he can as we try to figure it out.
That's a new one for me. I just learned that skill.
But for us, because we're older, it was the email thing, right? So email started it. And you got the nasty, like, per my last email stuff. There was all these, like, passive-aggressive, like, and maybe, right? Maybe, but we're back to that this is water thing again. Like, maybe she's being a complete B to me and she wants to make a point. Or maybe her inbox is stacked up and maybe she has 50 different tasks and maybe she didn't sleep last night and maybe she didn't, she could be in a diminished state, And so I know something we talk about with our team just internally at Anew a lot of times is don't guess, just don't guess, just talk to somebody, right? Just connect. And that's the other piece of it is why you're not guessing, because we're going to guess wrong. Like we're really bad guessers. We're always going to guess into the negative, right? Amplify that negative. And especially when there's no information, right? Like if somebody goes dark or you don't hear anything back, you send an email. It can't be that they didn't check their email. It's like they're ignoring me. And then you start building up all these resentments. But not only don't guess, but just have that conversation and connect with somebody, I think is a big one. So from a CBT standpoint, are you concerned about stopping the mind reading, or are you concerned about giving them interventions that will help sort of naturally stop the mind reading by like reality testing it, reality checking it, or giving them those secondary strategies?
Yeah. So we're going to start with that reality testing because we want them to see that it's not true. Yeah. And just through that work in itself, that the emotions that get attached to that
are yours.
Yeah.
Because they're yours.
Yeah. Now
you generated it. You made it this whole story.
Yep. And so now they get to control that emotion. And then we have other pieces, right? Like we can reframe it and change it to exactly what you just said. If boss is calling, oh, I must be in trouble. Right.
Yes.
Automatic.
Yes.
Now it's boss is calling. I wonder what it is, right? Versus that automatic. And you might have that automatic, which if it's always going to happen, that's fine. But can you flip it quickly to, this is where, boss is calling, I'm in trouble. No, that's not what I talked about in therapy. It is, I wonder what he needs. I'm going to answer the phone so that I can find out.
It's gotta be a nightmare scenario if you're just guessing they're not mad at you, and then they ask and they're like, because I hate you. And they verify and validate it the first time, right? So then you got to scramble, and it's like, well, not always.
That happened for one of my clients.
Oh, tell me about it.
That was one of their piece, was that exact example. Like every time my boss calls or says I need to talk, I go here. And he's like, okay, so let's talk about it. Does it happen every time? Well, no, not every time. We process it. And when we got the reframe, okay, let's see what they need. Ended up getting it right up the very next time. I was like, oh my gosh, what are the terrible chances of this happening? And then we had to process it, and we had to we had to rebuild that case with more evidence on top of it.
So let's expand our search.
Yeah.
And get it off of this one person. Yeah. Yeah, that's crazy. And and that's where I keep going back to this idea of therapy as an art, not a science. I mean, even something as structured as this, read through it, understand, do your worksheets, do your counting, do your scaling. 6 weeks later, you're 50% less. Yay. It doesn't mean they're going to be better. It doesn't mean it guarantees a straight line to that progress or any of that kind of stuff. And you do still have to weave in, I think, those dynamic interventions to kind of reframe that stuff along the way. And oh, what did we learn? Sometimes you win, sometimes you learn. And it's just okay, well, we learned something there, and I think also broadening that perspective is really important. So yeah, maybe this boss, some bosses don't like some employees. Maybe they don't have a great relationship with you, but does that define all of your relationships? Right. And so broadening that out is really good. And, worst case scenario, they could just start leaving their boss on red and you don't have to deal with it. Or silently, what's the new one? Quietly quitting or
quiet quitting.
Is it quiet quitting?
I think so.
Where you're just kind of mailing it in.
Yep.
Yeah. That feels like a post-COVID thing. I know people have kind of mailed it in at work for a long time, but that whole concept of quiet quitting is because they were at home and it's so easy to quietly quit there because you used to live your life, jump on the call. And now that they're being forced back into the work environment, it's resistance.
Which is basically, when you really break it down, it's just a new term for just doing what's on your contract.
For being half-assed. Yeah. Doing a half-assed job or just mailing it in or whatever. So, but that's okay because, I don't know that that's new. I don't think there's anything new under the sun that way. I mean, everybody's had that work experience where they felt like they were the person carrying the team and everybody dragging everybody else along, or the school project where I did all the work and these three guys just showed up, for presentation day. So.
All the work.
Because they never helped me.
Yep.
Yeah.
They never helped you?
They never helped me. Not
and
once.
Sometimes that is the case. Sometimes you get into those groups, and I've been in one of those groups.
Sure. I've been a never helper. I've been there to make sure you had 4 in the group. You know what I mean? And so you can't be on every time. So, all right. So we're getting close on time. Like you were right, as promised, we could go for hours, but I think that's good. Is there anything, we covered most of the distortions. So I guess what my question would be 2 questions. One, if you're a therapist and you want to know more about this, or you're interested in developing CBT skills or learning more about that, do you have any recommendations, how to pursue that knowledge?
Yeah, you can go to any training site, right? And find any CBT, right? CBT training, you're going to find things. Another plug, right? PESI is a good one. They always have CBT trainings out there.
Spell that?
PESI.
Okay.
So if you go to that website, they have a lot of already pre-recorded seminars, and they're usually 16, 18 hours long. And so, but you're going to get a whole comprehensive review. If you want to, you can go to the 𝐬𝐡𝐷 Institute and become certified in CBT. Full disclosure, I am not. It's just one of the modalities that I started out with, and I'm a very kind of linear person, so it matched my personality early on. But I think it's called the Academy of Cognitive Therapy is what it's called, and you can go through their certification process.
Okay, interesting. And then so on the client side, if you're somebody who feels like they may benefit from this, Any recommendations about seeking out a CBT therapist? We kind of joked about everybody has it on their list, but how will I know? Like, how can I just order it up? I want a CBT. I only want to work CBT. I guess so. How do they go about doing that? And when should they be thinking that CBT might be useful for them? When are the times that it's like it works best and could be most helpful to them?
Yeah, I think similar to solution focus is it can work. It's just a matter. A lot of it's going to depend on where you're at. So you may get stuck in a couple of phases in the CBT model just based off of like your own intrinsic motivation and where you're at. But you can absolutely ask your therapist, I've been researching CBT. I want to do CBT. You can call in to, like, if you call to a new and say, hey, I want to find somebody who can do CBT, chances are I'll get that phone call of like, hey, which therapist can I put them with? And then I can, delegate that way. And then you can also go on to like a website like the Academy of CBT, and they have a list of certified CBT diplomats is what they call them.
And there's other places like Psychology Today, they'll list CBT. I mean, those people can pay to be on there and stuff like that, but so what? They're paying to let you know that they can help you in those ways. So it could be a good thing for sure. So, okay. I think that's great. I appreciate your time, Dr. Montoya. Welcome back, to New England. I hope you come back. If you see Casey on the split screen with the Zoom and producer Ian going crazy over there trying to keep the video quality and, trying to get the sound to match so it doesn't look like we're watching one of those old movies, You'll know Casey is in Ohio, but Casey's in New Hampshire right now, and we'll be glad to have you back anytime and come up with another topic. It was awesome. Casey shared a lot of resources, talked about a lot of things that if you need help, if you need CBT, whatever, definitely we'll link those, in the descriptions. Ian can take care of that. But just overall, like we talked about early in this conversation, if you or a loved one feels like you need help with anything, behavioral health, mental health issues, you don't have to have a diagnosable condition. You don't have to be, well, I know I'm depressed. I know that I have anxiety. It could just be substance abuse issues. It could just be, I just have a sense that things could be better. You just could be in a place where I feel like I'm doing more of the surviving than thriving. Please reach out to us, especially if you live in Ohio or New Hampshire. So ANEWBH, so ANEWBH.com. Very simple. You can find us on Instagram. You can link through the podcast website. You don't have to live down the street from one of our locations, although very soon, I think everybody in New Hampshire and Ohio is going to live down the street from one of our locations just because the demand is insane. We talked earlier about those, that 57%, I think you said, that don't receive help. One of our missions, not only to have the most, provider-friendly experience possible for the helpers, but I would love to eliminate the concept of underserved populations. And that feels like this stupid, massive goal of let's end world hunger, but why not? Why not shoot for that? Why not put the people at the Kaiser Foundation out of business because there are no underserved populations to study? So we've yet to go to a location. They said, we're good, we're full, so we're going to keep looking for opportunities to help. So anywhere in Ohio, New Hampshire, again, ANEWBH.com. You can fill out the form online. You can call us anytime. We're either the answer, and we'll be glad to help you. And if not, we will find somebody who can help you. So again, plugs all in, lots of links for Ian to do. Dr. Montoya, thank you again for being here. Producer Ian, thanks for making this all happen. I know we're a lot to work with as far as editing and cleaning things up, and we took 6 breaks that you guys won't even know. But in the meantime, thank you guys, especially at home, for watching. Your time is the most valuable asset you have, so we appreciate you spending an hour with us. Hopefully you're 1% more educated on the topic and feeling 1% better about your options and your solutions. So until next time, take care of yourself, and whenever possible, take care of each other. Thanks.